Rising sun. When I woke up, it was pitch black outside, compared to the big sky horizon I was accustomed to. I'm slowly watching the summer daylight fade away. I packed out of camp and was on the road before 6 a.m. I decided to search the town in case there was a business that had coffee. Nothing was open. I saw a 15-passenger van with a trailer parked outside of a motel with 20 bicycles on a roof rack. It was a pay-to-ride deal where the company drove you up the mountain and let you ride down the other side. I hoped to not see those cheaters later. I took pictures of the morning mountain and tightened my sandal straps for a long, kinky day of climbing mountains. I had 32 miles to get to the town of St. Mary and had no clue how much elevation I would climb. I was never a fan of looking at elevation charts before riding. I felt it would be easier to accept the difficulty in the moment. I was riding on a narrow 2-lane highway with no shoulder the entire way up the mountain. I crossed my fingers that I wouldn't get swiped by an idiot with a 35-foot camper. St. Mary is situated outside the entrance of the Going to the Sun Road. The National Park Service built this road through the mountains that take on the same name. It crests Logan's Pass and offers a view of all the other surrounding peaks in Glacier National Park. Elevation 6,466 feet. I had a good couple of days of riding ahead of me. The air was a comfortable coolness as I started climbing the tree-lined roadway. The sun was slow to come over the trees, which caused the forest floor to cast a bluish haze as nature awakened. I kept seeing black shadowy creatures hidden behind the trees popping their heads out. I was nervous that it might be bears, but it was just cows. They stared quietly and stealthily. I had half-heart attacks the entire morning. I climbed for 8 miles and the road flattened out for a while before sending me down the most incredible hill bomb. It felt like I was descending for miles, a well-deserved break. The view opened up and I had an incredible overlook on my left side where the sun perfectly illuminated the lakes and mountains in the distance. The lakes were below me a few hundred feet, reflecting the mountains off their glassy sheen. I was cruising easily over 30 miles an hour on the ridge of the mountain, and it ultimately spit me out right into the fork where I hit Highway 89 north towards St. Mary. Highway 89 started off mellow through grassy fields and not really mountainous at all. Within a few miles, it turned into a swervy inclined road with more dramatic landscapes. Up, up, and up. The scenery was helping me forget about how hard the riding was. In fact, I had forgotten every difficult day in Montana and was solely living in this moment. The mountain was healing my soul. Seeing the series of mountain faces as the sun came up was something else. The clarity of the contrasted edges and the ruggedly true colors were so raw and commanding. I was captured by the majesty, and I don't think I had seen any place this beautiful in my life. I knew it would only get better as I went into the park. A little after 9 a.m., I saw the bicycle van from the motel drive past me. I laughed and pointed at them because they would not be killing it as hard as me, fully loaded. Am I turning into an arrogant prick? I saw a sign that said St. Mary, 5 miles, and was excited to grab breakfast as a reward for all this climbing. My ascent started to crest again, and I found myself going downhill. I'm always wary of downhills, though. They never last as long as you hope for, and end up being a letdown more times than not. This downhill kept going and going and going. It super boosted me the entire 5 miles into town. I couldn't believe it. I was going what felt like over 40 miles an hour and was passing cars in my lane. It was fun and exactly what I needed after so much climbing that morning. I saw a little strip mall with a grocery and popped in to look at the prices. I looked around for cookies and found that Oreos were $7.75. I opted for a banana. The woman running the register seemed very European, maybe Swedish due to her accent and blonde hair. She tried to upsell me on items at the checkout and second-guessed my choice to buy only a single banana and coffee. I talked my way out of it and crawled into a cafeteria table to take my well-deserved break. The next step of the day was to enter the national park and set up camp. I rode to the visitor center first, as I wanted to get a map and find out the situation with bears. National forests have laws that fine you for not storing food properly while camping, and I wanted to educate myself. I talked to a park ranger who told me he had ridden a single-speed bike with no brakes through the park, because that's the equipment the government issues them. You'd think they could shave $500 off the military budget for a good ranger bicycle. As I was leaving the visitor center, 2 women, Jen and Ellie, approached me. They were both a few years younger than me and explained they'd also been touring for a couple months. Jen had broken a spoke and hoped I could help with my tools and/or expertise. We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet back at the bike camp later. I was stoked to meet some cyclists quickly and felt I would enjoy my time there. I rode 6 miles into the park and followed St. Mary Lake. It was surrounded by mountains and would introduce a new landscape every time I came around a new bend. I was in awe by the clarity of reflections in the lake water. The perfect blue sky and stone cliffs created a tapestry of good vibes. As I rode closer to the mountains, they got bigger and bigger. It was a majestic experience. I watched other cyclists coming in from the other direction and smiling at me. Cars would honk because they saw my loaded bike. It felt like the Disney of the natural world. Being at the mountain was everything I had been dreaming about for the last month. The northern United States had been arid and mentally unnerving. The cool mountain air, gorgeous views, and quality humans offered me some respite. I learned on this trip that many national and state parks offer hike-bike campsites. They operate on a first-come, first-served basis for anyone entering without a vehicle. They are typically a group area that multiple campers share. There are 2 in Glacier Park on either side of the mountain, and that was perfect for allowing me to take my time. I arrived at the hike-bike area and set up pretty quickly. Jen and Ellie made their way back to the camp and showed me their traveling bike setups. They both had Surly brand bikes in 4 panniers like me. Jen had a gigantic pot that she stored things in on the front rack. This time around, they used it to make a huge batch of veggie soup. They had enough to feed the 3 of us for lunch and dinner. They started riding as a part of this group to do good deeds for people as they rode across America. They lived on the East Coast and the ride started in New York. They thought it was overbearing to ride with a group of hundreds of people, so they fell behind and decided to team up and do their own thing all the way to the West Coast. It was their first bike tour, and it sounded like they had some meaningful experiences together. It was fun to share camp and have a communal meal with them. Jess tried to catch a swim in the afternoon while Ellie and I did a 5-mile hike to a lake hidden in the mountain. We ended up exhausted from not having enough water and food. Jess's swimming plans were thwarted when she found the lake closed due to families of bears wandering about it. We all ruminated about our silly mishaps over a few beers and ended the night with a game of runes over the campfire. It was a good time with the homies. If this was day one in Glacier, I couldn't wait to see what people and adventures awaited me the next day. I have another 5 a.m. wake-up call with the black bears tomorrow. The cool morning air refreshed my sinuses as I exited the tent to do my bathroom duty. The park closed the mountain road to cyclists after 11 a.m., so leaving early was essential for me to make good time to the top. It was very considerate of them to create space for cyclists to enjoy the road, especially with Logan's Pass being so narrow and people driving campers and RVs up it. Even though I had climbed past St. Mary, there was still plenty of mountain to crest. I was sitting around 4,500 feet and would ascend over 2,000 feet that day. I got on the road before 6 a.m. and again was stunned by beauty. I followed a massive lake for a while, and the sunrise shimmered off the sky-bound mountains. There was hardly anyone driving that early, and I felt safe having the road to myself. I stopped several times to take in the views and snap a few photos. It's the kind of thing you wish you had another person to put your arm around and bask in the glory of nature. Mountains and oceans completely captivate me. I have a natural inclination to sing, and that's basically what I did during the first hour of riding. I sang songs about the glory of the mountain and the mystery of love. If only I had a good voice and the ability to pluck a guitar. A single sign read, Logan Pass, 12 miles. I had little expectation for the terrain, but it ended up being a steady climb. I only saw a handful of cars on the way up as I tried to stay against the mountainside of the road, since there was no significant guardrail. The road featured winding switchbacks and absolutely breathtaking views. I eventually followed the ridge of the mountain, and a tunnel was blown out of the side. I saw a handful of natural waterfalls that splashed into the road and onto me. The road was dry and clear this time of year, but in the distance, you could see plenty of snow on the mountain caps in every direction. The road generally couldn't open until July because of the snow. The air was still cool, but once I made it to the side of the mountain that was sun-facing, I got a new boost of energy. I made it to the top by 8:30 a.m. and was relieved to see the Logan Pass Visitor Center in the distance. I found a sign for the Northern Continental Divide and asked a random guy to photograph me next to it. It was funny to know that I saw the southern and northern tips of the Continental Divide. The guy taking my photo told me he was from the Kansas City area. We geeked out on what a small world it is. After some rest at the visitor center, I prepared to make a fast descent down the pass. It would be a wild ride entirely downhill for 11 miles. Unfortunately, the wind chill was probably 48 degrees. I forgot to wear a jacket or gloves because the sunny sky misled me. I started 30 miles an hour down the mountain ridge, completely unprepared. No stopping now. The views on the west side of the mountain were even more beautiful. Now that the sun was fully out, everything was illuminated. I could see for miles in every direction. I understood why the drive was so popular. The cliffs were dramatic, and the turns were so sharp that the act of turning was the only time I used my brakes. There are only a few stopping areas since the road was so narrow. Going down the mountain was kind of scary as I passed cars and let gravity do all the work. I said good morning to all the road bikers climbing in the opposite direction. I felt bad for them because all the traffic seemed to be coming from their direction. It sucks to deal with naive drivers when you're climbing at 5 miles an hour. Early bird gets the worm. It took me about 45 minutes to get down the pass, and my hands were freezing. I was buckling down and taking it because I didn't want to dig to the bottom of my bag for gloves. I'm such a lazy ass. My first destination at the park's west end would be Lake McDonald, which had a general store and restaurant. I had to endure 9 more miles of flat road through the tall tree shade. I arrived at the general store around 11 a.m. and thankfully found a great selection of snacks and coffee. It was bustling with tourists and themed like a log cabin built of oak. I found some novelty locking knives that had names etched into them, but didn't spot my name. I did see Ricardo, though. I don't usually impulse buy things of this nature, but this one tickled my fancy. I bought my $20 souvenirs and snacks and sat outside on a bench. An older gentleman saw my bike and asked what I was up to. He was from Nebraska and said he had just inherited 1,000 acres of prairie in Wyoming. He and his brother were trying to turn it into a homestead. He explained how the government has specific rules for homesteading, and the land had to be vacant for 5 years before you could legally live off the land. It was informative and made me wonder if I could create my own homestead someday. I rode another 7 miles around Lake McDonald, which was completely flat. I was officially out of the mountains for now, and the views opened up as I followed the water. This side of the park was littered with tall fir trees, and the sun glistened off the lake's crystal clear surface. I stopped at Camp Apgar in the early afternoon and started to set up camp for the night. When I arrived, a handful of cyclists were already in the hike-bike area. Some were leaving, some were staying. The first person I talked to was a lovely brunette woman named Nina. She was bursting with energy and from New Zealand. She was a physio, or physical therapist, as we Americans say. She had flown with her bike into Banff, Canada, and planned to ride to Yellowstone to see the expected eclipse in a few weeks. She was pursuing her graduate degree and still doing homework throughout her ride, which was impressive. She told me about the other travelers staying at the camp. She invited me to dinner with her and another cyclist named Hannah. Hannah was from Scotland and took the summer off to cycle towards Yellowstone before starting a new job back home. She was meticulous in her daily mileage logs. She kept track of elevations and how many miles she went every day in a little notebook. I asked if she could tell me about going over the Cascade Mountains in Washington, and she simply said, "They're treacherous and steep. At least I know what I'm getting into in about a week." Yikes. We all met at a restaurant around 6:30 in the village of West Glacier, a little retail area near the park's west entrance. Nina showed up with another cyclist, Chris, whom she had met briefly after meeting me. He was from England and taking a bike trip while his wife was crunching some summer study time for her master's degree. We all sat at a table and plugged our phones into the outlet below. Finding electricity is the knee-jerk reaction for touring cyclists when paying to eat in an establishment. I was feeling good about this crew. We had a server who couldn't have been older than 20 years and seemed uncomfortable at his job. We threw him a curveball when we all had different accents. To make small talk, he asked us where we were from. "England." "Scotland."
New Zealand?
Me in a nasally accent.
I'm from Australia.
Everyone in the group played along until I broke character. We all burst out laughing while I went back to my normal voice and said I'm from Missouri. The server was embarrassed, but we didn't bust his chops too much. It was Nina's birthday, which I found out was the catalyst for us all going out to eat. She ordered a steak, and the rest of us got whatever seemed like the biggest portion of food on the menu. We all hung out for over 2 hours, learning about each other and sharing epic stories about our biking adventures. Chris had flown down to Mexico and made his way up the west coast, now southeast toward Yellowstone for the eclipse. They decided to team up and ride to Yellowstone together. Nina told us about her worldwide backpacking adventures, traveling through Asia and Europe. She also ran marathons and adventure hike competitions. That night, they turned into an English dream team cycling powerhouse. I was getting the feeling that other countries were afforded more time away from work to travel. The booth behind us had left, and we noticed they had half a large pizza uneaten. Chris made fun of me for pointing it out, but then he asked the busboy if we could finish it. We transferred the remaining 6 slices into the middle of our table and consumed them promptly. The rest of the night, we were joking about being the dirty cyclists who would eat anything to get carbs, and jokingly asked the server if they had any scraps in the back we could eat. When it started getting dark, we rode back to the campground, and I enjoyed riding in a group for once. I was thankful for the good times I shared with these folks. I got up early in the morning to grab breakfast before leaving the park. All my English friends left a lasting impression on me, so I felt compelled to write a letter to each of them. I wanted to encourage them on the remainder of their trip and tell them how much I appreciated meeting them. I left the letters on the picnic table and rode towards a restaurant that opened at 7 a.m. I ordered a coffee and scanned their thematic national park menu. Per usual, I gravitated toward the egg scramble with gravy. My waitress was a woman not much older than me named Christine. She had kind eyes and a warm smile that made me feel like she was down to earth. I asked her if I could get gravy poured on top of my breakfast platter, and she happily pulled some strings to make it happen. I tried to get to know her as she came around to fill coffee. She had decided to travel after graduating college. She worked seasonally at different national parks while she figured out what the future would hold. We had very kindred spirits, and I felt honored to have crossed paths with her. As I left Glacier National Park, I reflected on beauty, not only of nature, but of friendship. My spirit was full from these wonderful interactions with easygoing souls. I never thought one place could offer this much beauty, but the experience surpassed my expectations. I had a mellow 40 miles to Kalispell, Montana, but I was excited for lunch in the town of Whitefish. My friend Jesse grew up there, and I had to report back about the contemporary scene. I had the luxury of riding bike trails following the highway for about 10 miles. I got to Whitefish at lunchtime and grabbed food at a local brewery. I took a quick ride around downtown, and it seemed reminiscent of all the ski villages in Colorado. Nothing too special, but they did have an impressive skate park. After lunch, I rode south towards Kalispell and felt the wind shift. I rode into a headwind for nearly 2 hours while feeling the temperature rise significantly. I was used to the 65-ish degrees near the mountain, and now was back in the prairie heat wave. What I thought would be an easy day of riding ended up feeling miserable during that 18-mile stretch. I planned to stay with my friend Chris and his wife Amy. They lived on the outskirts of town, and their neighborhood sat atop a small mountain, or at least that's what I would call the hill to get up there. It took me 20 minutes to ride 4 blocks. This road was one of the steepest grades I'd ridden the whole trip. I was exhausted by the time I got to the top, but seeing the two of them waiting in the driveway was the encouragement that I needed. I could see the pain in their eyes from how treacherous that hill was. I felt hysterical and could do nothing but laugh as Chris and I smiled at each other. I hugged him and he introduced me to Amy because this was the first time I'd met her. They had gone to a church I attended about 5 years earlier, and we were excited to catch up on life. Chris was also excited to finally host somebody from Kansas City, as I was the first to come out west to see him. Chris spent the evening telling me about their wedding photography business and long-term dreams for living in such a beautiful place. We ate a dinner of buffalo burgers and sat out on his back porch to catch the sunset. We noticed the neighbors' kids out playing and everybody's dogs were running around together. There were no fences and they all knew each other by name. Chris explained how Montana had a slower pace and starkly contrasts city life. Their neighborhood shared a lake, shared backyards, and had wooded trails behind the houses. It was a great example of community and how knowing your neighbors hasn't vanished from the American psyche. It made me think about the concept of being a stranger, which, at its core, is just fear. Fear of the unknown, who that person is. All we need to have a community is to know and care about each other. You can't be a stranger to somebody that you know. I had a bedroom in the basement and cracked the window to let the brisk Montana night air heal me for one more night. The next day, I was back on my bullshit of long mileage days, already dreaming about the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. I rode 45 minutes on a bike trail before ultimately getting on US 2 through the piney mountains of western Montana. Things got sticky fast on this 2-lane highway when I lost the shoulder and the climbs began. There was 8 to 10 miles uphill, and every third vehicle going up the mountain was a truck. I was holding on for dear life while pushing against gravity. I passed many bodies of water throughout the day and ultimately was looking for Loon Lake. Back in Kalispell, an employee at the bike shop tipped me off about a Forest Service road shortcut that began at Loon Lake. I grabbed lunch at McGregor Lake in a small pub that doubled as a mini casino. While paying my bill, I heard a guy get excited at a slot machine as the winning bells went off. He bought his slot receipt and was ready to cash out his $800 at the bar. 3 lakes later, I turned into National Forest Road 763. There were signs posted everywhere stating that it was closed in the winter and had no road maintenance. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but it was about to get radical by the look of this rugged dirt pathway. The forest was thick with trees as I followed the narrow dirt road that could barely fit 2 cars. On one side, the cliff dropped hundreds of feet into the valley below, and the other side butted up against trees and rocks. Only after 10 minutes on the road, a guy in a golf cart passed me. He had a 30-pack of Keystone Light and a dog seemingly out on a joyride. He drove next to me for a couple minutes and broke the ice by asking if I smoked pot. I told him I didn't, and I think he got embarrassed and decided to drive on. Thank God. The guy seemed harmless, but I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I needed to clear my headspace for a while. The road turned into a steady downhill and was incredible. I was deep in the middle of the forest and following the mountain ridge. I followed the Fisher River and tried to be prudent by ringing my bell to ward off possible bears. It's spooky being in the forest alone. I saw only a handful of cars during my few hours out there. It felt like I was on my own for the entire afternoon. By the time I reached the forest road's end, I had covered about 35 miles. I was stopped by a fork for two roads going towards the city, a highway on the north side of the river, or an old scenic road that hadn't been updated in a long time on the south side. I took the old road since I assumed it had less traffic. I guessed correctly because I only saw two cars in that last 10-mile stretch into town. This beat-up road was on a ridge and ended with a spectacular view. There was a cliff overlooking miles and miles of mountains in every direction, and the Fisher River splitting out. It was the perfect time of day for the sunlight to illuminate the western sky. This pothole-stricken road was well worth the views. I became hyper-aware of my mood changes. Today started frustrating and painful with the slow mountain climbs, but once I made it to this overlook, I felt it was all worth the work. It's a different sense of accomplishment when a picturesque landscape is my reward. Working, getting a paycheck, or even finishing a video project doesn't compare to what I get from physically pushing my body for a few minutes of perfect light over a river. I have complained a lot on this trip, more than anything in my whole life, but I'm learning to accept my range of emotions. I continually deal with an honest version of myself, and being alone means I have to cope with self-love. It's a weird thing to feel okay with being angry or to admit exhaustion. I'm learning the importance of embracing my emotions and letting the moment capture me, which helps me move forward somewhat hopeful. God, I'm still so jaded though. I finally made it into Libby, Montana, and was ready to fill my body with fuel. I poked around the main street to see what fare they had to offer and found a microbrewery with free Wi-Fi. It was a small concrete building with a few tables and a bar. I got a burger and a flight of local beers while settling in for a well-deserved break. I discovered they were celebrating their 3rd anniversary with a happy hour, so drinks were cheap. I couldn't have been more pleased with this nightcap. The bartender tipped me off about a campground on the other side of town, so I paid my tab and made my way to set up camp. I got my tent up just as the sun went down and met the lovely camp hosts. They were a couple in their 70s who traveled around taking care of campgrounds in their retirement. When I told them I was heading west, they said there was a swinging bridge about 8 miles out of town. I now had a fun destination ahead of me tomorrow morning. Montana is full of surprises. The next day, I woke up at 5 a.m. in complete darkness. As the summer days moved into autumn, it took the sun a little bit longer to get up. I didn't want to get out of bed, and my body was sore all over. Nothing could prepare me for the following circumstances on this peaceful morning. After 10 minutes of laying around, I decided I needed to get up and at 'em. When I sat up, I immediately felt my bowels go into autopilot. The bathroom was about 70 feet away from my campsite and required a bit of preparation to make the trek. I stumbled around to find my lantern somewhere underneath all my blankets and clothes. I tucked and rolled out of my tent and started the journey towards the outhouse. I didn't run because that makes it worse when you need to go. I walked with purpose towards the bathroom and felt the time bomb ticking down. I had a churning pain in my gut while feeling myself prairie dog a little bit. I got 20 feet from the bathroom and didn't trust my body at all. The nightmare of not making it in time seemed too realistic a scenario with how much my body was pushing against my brain's optimism. I unbuttoned my pants in preparation and started running as I was less than 10 feet from the entrance. I felt it coming on, and I was just about in tears. I do not want to shit myself. At the entrance of the bathroom, I ripped my pants down to my ankles and long jumped my ass onto the toilet and unloaded. That 3 minutes was one of the most nightmarish on this trip. After my bowels felt empty, I spent some quality time on the throne of judgment to decompress the trauma. I was relieved I had made it in time and wiped the sweat from my forehead in celebration. A moment later, I felt something underneath my feet, something not concrete. I illuminated the floor in front of me and saw a trail of footprints leading to the door. I put the pieces together in my head in horror. I had stepped in my own poop. As I ran into the bathroom and dropped my pants, I let out all over the floor. Now it was on my shoe and on the floor. Thankfully, they had plenty of paper towels, but I was not stoked to have to clean up my own mess. Very disappointed in myself, honestly. I was thankful I didn't get it on my shorts and it only hit my leg and shoes. This was one of the most embarrassing things I've ever experienced, even though it was only for an audience of one. I guess this is just how bike touring is. Sitting on a saddle for 12 hours a day over the course of 4 months caused my bowels to be very sensitive in the morning. I can no longer play Jedi mind tricks to hold it in. My sphincter has become the master of my destiny. After having such a shitty morning, I still got on the road by 6 a.m. and decided to pick up breakfast at the local gas station. It was the only place open that early, and they had little selection. I settled on a ham and cheese Hot Pocket, Pop-Tarts, and extreme caffeine coffee. Bring the pain. My first destination for the day would be Kootenai Falls, where the alleged swing bridge was located. The trailhead was only 8 miles away, and the scenery was gorgeous. I rode the ridge above the river, and the weather was still cool in the morning. I was so entranced by my surroundings that I missed the stop for the trailhead altogether. Once I realized what had happened, I made an abrupt U-turn and rode myself onto the trail, leading through the trees at full speed. This trail was meant for walking, but I wanted to get as deep as possible before ditching my wheels. The trail was not smooth by any means. In fact, it was crazy bumpy. I had to watch out to not hit tree roots or other protruding death traps in the earth. The trail got too rugged for me to travel any further by bike. Once I was hiking, I noticed that my phone had full bars of LTE cell service. It was like they built a tower here just for selfie takers. I was texting and posting and loving this modern connectivity. It only took 10 minutes to walk out to the rope bridge. I stopped upon arrival to take in the moment. I was surrounded by mountains, a raging river below me, and a bouncing rope bridge to my side. Surprisingly, the bridge was modern and it felt safe to walk on. It spanned about 50 feet long and was at least 15 feet above the water. It was very bouncy and swayed as I went across. This was a serene moment of existence. I returned to my bike and started some real riding for the day. I rerouted myself southwest on the Montana 56 highway instead of US 2 West. It connected me to the 200 highway and spit me out in the same direction with less mileage, while being a more scenic route. I saw a mile marker that said 36 miles to Sandpoint, Idaho, and I was appreciative to have a gauge of how long my day would be. I initially had a couple of mellow elevation climbs, but overall, the road ended up slightly downhill. The endless amounts of pine trees were staring at me and protecting my wimpy fair skin from the burning sun. The temperature rose as the day went on, and the lake's water offered a cool breeze to keep me sane. I passed many small townships that sat on the shore of Bull Lake. This lake was bigger than all the others I had seen throughout the morning, and I gazed into the mighty reflections of the jagged rock coast, which spanned for what seemed like miles. I found a sign that stated I was at the lowest elevation in all of Montana. I was sitting at a cool 188 feet above sea level. That meant I descended over 6,000 feet in 3 days, and under 300 miles. Wow. I saw a billboard for a joint called Big Sky Pantry. I figured that would be a good resting spot. When I rolled up, I saw an older gentleman with a touring bike, obviously taking his lunch break as well. I introduced myself and found out his name was Gary, and he had been out riding as many months as I had. He was a retired statistics teacher for the Army and was enjoying retirement. He had done many bicycle tours, including some overseas while roaming with the military. He grew tired of planning his bike trips and was now randomly going around. He went on about how this pantry was the best bakery for 300 miles in any direction. He boasted about how good the pastries were and told me this was his second time through on this current trip. The anticipation was killing me. I was hungry and ready to eat. The inside was the size of a small convenience store. There was one employee who sat behind the little deli section. I found an impressively large drink selection in their cooler. That will come in handy soon. There was a discount section in the back with weird drinks and snacks that had never been sold. I moved over to the bakery section and found a couple of freshly baked banana bread trays. It was followed by baskets full of delectable sweet treats. They had a sandwich menu, and I knew I would spend more money here than I needed to. The attendant made me a turkey sandwich while I carefully chose freshly baked treats from the glass case. The attendant was friendly and seemed excited that I was so stoked on the place. I joined Gary outside at the patio tables, and he went on about his travels and various worldviews. He had traveled to almost every country in the world during his stint in the Army, which allowed him to experience many different cultures. He said he was about done with bike touring and might just start hiking instead. He didn't own a house, but during the winter, he took care of a couple's cabin in the brutal winters of New York State. He was living his best life. As we talked, another cyclist rolled up to stop for lunch. Her name was Judy, and she was on a very epic trip. She started in Lawrence, Kansas, but lives in Baltimore, Maryland. She was making her way to see friends around the country and changing the route as she went along. She only had the goal to make it back to Baltimore by Christmas, and it seemed like she was on par to make it. Judy was retired and had one of the most interesting jobs. She worked for the Smithsonian and did microscopic photography. Her main subject was bugs. I always trip out on photos and videos of small creatures because it seems so tedious. Meeting these tiny organisms in their natural habitats is a skill that requires patience and accurate anticipation of how they will act. I discovered that we all started our respective tours on April 1st. I enjoyed meeting kind folks, and it helped remind me that we can all do whatever we want if we put our minds to it. Montana was one hell of a long haul, and it felt like a completely different experience from Texas. The 90-plus mile days were treacherous, but the people I met were storied and bursting with life. It's a trip to have had 3 completely separate experiences in one vast place. The eastern state exhausted me, Glacier gave me hope and unbound beauty, and the western end offered me manageable terrain with gorgeous landscapes. I'm still feeling emotionally low while trying to keep my eye on the prize of taking a break with friends in Seattle. I wandered a few miles further into the Idaho Panhandle, where I found myself in a valley that flattened out. I passed a couple of quarries, but was stopped in my tracks by a car graveyard. It looked like the owner had built a fortress out of junkyard vehicles that towered 50 feet tall. Everything from family cars to semi-trucks, pre-1960s. I always wondered what happened to old cars like that. I guess they end up as apocalyptic fortresses for preppers. I was waiting for them to come alive and Mad Max my ass. I was headed to Sandpoint, Idaho, but had no information about the area or cell phone service. Damn T-Mobile. I wanted the locals' opinion about where I could stay for the night, so I stopped at a gas station. I was about 15 miles from Sandpoint, and the clerk suggested calling the Chamber of Commerce. I found one bar of LTE cell signal and dialed the number for the chamber office. They gave me the most roundabout script answer. Yes, there's plenty of information about camping in this area if you just come visit our office and grab a brochure. The cell service dropped out right after she made that statement, and I lost the call. I think it was a sign. I figured it'd all work out once I got to town. I ate at Taco Bell to use the Wi-Fi and wait for the sun to go down. Around 7 p.m., I figured it was time to find a stealth camp. Maps showed a campground 10 miles south of town, but I couldn't find out how much it cost. As I started to ride towards the outskirts of town, I noticed a blocked grass ramp. It was behind a metal barrier and angled down to the side of a bridge. I went down to scout it out and decided it would be the perfect spot to camp. It was private, hopefully quiet, and easily accessible. I bumped my way down into the grass gully and posted up camp. Near my tent was some "Caution, police line do not cross" tape. It didn't seem to be a crime scene. Maybe the DOT had no other tape to block an area with. I locked up my bike and turned in for the night. Another long, sunny day to touch Idaho for less than 24 hours. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. and headed back into town, hoping to hit McDonald's for a terrible cup of coffee and a hash brown. I packed out my tent and headed back up the road. Trying to be sneaky while pushing a bike up the side of a highway is a funny scene. I'm going to look sketchy in any context. When I got to McDonald's, a guy with a backpack hollered at me from the other side of the parking lot, asking what time they open. We were both disappointed to find out they wouldn't open until 7 a.m., but he mentioned that the grocery store across the street did breakfast for pretty cheap. I followed him over there and we got to talking. His name was Jeff and he had a scruffy gray beard and seemed nice enough. The grocery had a dingy prepared foods area with a couple tables and fluorescent lighting. The employees were still getting ready, so we sat down and waited. I briefly summarized my bike trip to him, and his face lit up. He was so stoked that he paid for my breakfast. Thanks, dude. I presumed he was just a hitchhiker or something, but boy, did he have a life story. Jeff lost his house in Sandpoint a year previous. He put everything in a storage unit there, but ended up living in Oregon. He would come back to town and load up one van full at a time from the storage, sleep in his van, and drive back to Oregon every few months. He told me most of his life story and talked about all the people and jobs that had screwed him over throughout his life. After a couple hours, I told him I had to get going to meet my friend at the Washington border for lunch. He offered to give me a lift, but I told him I wanted to cycle it and kindly rejected the offer. He rebutted my decision and straight up offered to take me all the way to Seattle. But I told him I wasn't into it. It sketched me out how insistent he was. I gave him my email and told him to contact me so we could hang out again when I got to Oregon in a few weeks. After wiggling my way out of the conversation, I got on the road and headed into my final westward expanse. Northern Idaho was beautiful and full of glistening lakes, but I was fully aware that I wouldn't be close to any of the true beauty that this state bears. The best spots were in the middle and southern parts of the state. Like Delaware, I was only visiting Idaho briefly, and I cataloged this bizarre man, Jeff, as my state experience.